This episode is brought to you by Roundtable Group, the experts on experts. We've been connecting attorneys with experts for over 25 years. Find out more at roundtablegroup.com.
Welcome to Discussions at the Round Table. I'm your host, Noah Ballmer, and today I'm excited to welcome Samir Somal to the show. Mr. Somal is the CEO of Blue Ocean Global Technology, an online reputation management firm, as well as Girl Power Talk and Girl Power USA, which is a 501c3 nonprofit social enterprise dedicated to empowering women leaders in developing economies. He's a well-published author and expert in economic damages, IP, and internet defamation, and he holds a CFA, CFP, and CAIA certifications. Mr. Somal, thank you so much for joining me here today at the Roundtable.
Thank you, Noah. It's a pleasure and honor to be here, and looking forward to speaking on subjects of mutual interest, and delighted.
Absolutely. Well, let's jump into it. For nearly 20 years, you've been in finance, AI, nonprofits, and reputation management, just to name a few. How did you first get into expert witnessing?
Well, it's kind of that Dr. Benjamin Franklin aphorism, Noah, diligence is the mother of good luck. We founded Blue Ocean Global Technology, did a lot of work for PR firms, doing the technical work, collaborating on campaigns. They referred us to law firms, and an AmLaw top firm, Nixon Peabody, approached me one day and said, Samir, we've interviewed 4 experts. You're the 5th. And we want you to be an expert witness in this case. And I said, what is an expert witness? And why would I want to do that? And the folks at Nixon Peabody said, well, Samir, number one, you're like the perfect expert witness because you're not what we call a professional expert witness. You run a company that has served hundreds of clients. You've worked with our law firm on sensitive situations, advised our team. And so we know that you're able to provide value and you understand the nuances of digital advertising, online reputation management, technology development. And you also speak at events all over the world. You author CLE programs, and we know you'd be very good in front of a judge and a jury. And so why don't you give it a shot? The point of no return, that seems like a lifetime ago.
Well, speaking of that, how long ago was this, give or take?
That was about eight years ago, I think.
Okay, so you've been doing this for a hot minute. What sorts of things did you cover in those initial phone calls? What did you talk about in the vetting process?
Well, look, one, I think, of course, you cover your background, and you share the process. So our process is, of course, speak and connect with attorneys and be relatable and share that, hey, look, we receive documents, we review them, we come back with questions. Then if there's an expert report involved, which is more oftentimes not the case, then we come up with an outline, and then we're collaborative in working with counsel to review that outline. I know that there's in every group of people, Noah, as you can attest to, everything's the bell curve. And I always say that I tell attorneys up front, I say, if you could wave a wand and make a new friend and strategic partner and find the perfect expert witness where we are collaborative, we're thoughtful, we check pride and ego at the door because we want to get better. I and our team at Blue Ocean Global Technology really tries to be that. And then, of course, we want to cover, we ask for an overview of the case and, clarity about the expert's role, specifically how they envision it. Naturally, compensation is a subject of interest. And then, just disclosure kind of other opinions. What are some of the nuances that are concerning for the case, and discuss deadlines and any sort of formats that are appropriate. And then I always try to address communication. Do they like email? Do they like phone? I let them know that this case will be a priority, and you can reach me. As long as I'm not in an airplane, you can pretty much reach me on my mobile phone. And here's our team that is going to be supporting me for this engagement.
You talk about teamwork a lot. What are some of the elements of that teamwork that really make a great relationship between the expert witness and the engaging party?
One, I think using your ears and mouth, proportionately, which I think men struggle at relative to women, of course, making a generalization, but I think there's some truth to it. One, you're going to work with attorneys that are of all different types. Some are going to want to be hands off, laissez-faire. They're going to say, do your work, come back with the report, looks good, and you barely interact with them. Others, they want to play Tom Brady and Bill Belichick, and they want to, manage every element of the process. They don't want you talking to the client without them. They don't want you emailing them. So you got to feel that out at the beginning, and you got to say, hey, what are the rules for engagement here? And we're flexible to be able to work in the way that makes most sense. But what I don't want to do, Mrs., Miss, Mr. Counsel, they counsel, what I don't want to do is have to put toothpaste back in the tube. So understand up front. And I found that attorneys, they love that. They're like, Samir, thank you so much. Like, here are the things. And I asked them, what has been an awesome expert relationship and collaboration? What made that, you look so fondly upon that in hindsight? And what are some of the experts, what did they do as to why you'd never call them again? And so I asked those questions as well.
Did you have somebody show you the ropes your first couple of times, tell you what to expect in your first couple engagements, or were you kind of thrown in a little bit blind?
Well, look, my comment is expert witness work is analogous to entrepreneurship. It's like jumping in the Pacific Ocean and swimming across. And each case and each situation is idiosyncratic. I've had some awesome friends, other experts, attorneys. One that comes to mind is a gentleman named William Cheslovsky. He is with a firm, Ginsberg Jacobs, in Chicago. He's been an incredible mentor and friend. After engaging us, and we worked on several sensitive cases. I won't mention against, which prominent entity, because several of them are still going on. But Billy, as our team likes to affectionately call him, has just, because we built a personal relationship, he's tried to help me in every way possible, not just on his cases, but for me to become a better professional, an entrepreneur. And what I say is that you can learn something from everyone. And when you really take the time to earn mutual trust, respect, and friendship with counsel, there's a lot you can learn from them. So be humble, make it personal, and show the attorneys that, you are somebody that they're happy to be involved in this case. And you'll find that then they want to help you, and ask them for guidance. I always say that, hey, look, here is the way I'm thinking about it, counsel, but I welcome your thoughts and perspective, and maybe I have it completely wrong, but I know that our goal here is to make sure we have an optimal outcome. And I always say, you're the shepherd, I'm the proverbial sheep. This is your case, your counsel. I'm here to hopefully contribute to where you want to get to. And in order to do that, I take your advice and guidance and mentorship seriously.
When you work on a trial team, have you spent a significant amount of time working on teams that include other expert witnesses?
Absolutely. Complex cases, I'm thinking of one in particular involving intellectual property infringement and an e-commerce brand, and there were multiple experts that are there. And so one, it's counsel has different ideas. Sometimes they want you to look at the other people's experts' reports. Sometimes they don't. They want you to sometimes substantiate what they're saying. Again, you've got to seek counsel's guidance. But I think, having an abundance mentality, is something that I have in everything that I do. So if I'm going to work with other experts, I probably can learn from them, probably can build relationships with them. And, I've found that when you foster relationships from the heart and mind, and people never forget how you made them feel. And opposition experts I've gone against, I've forged friendships with, and they've wanted to collaborate, and they've referred cases my way. And of course, experts that have been on the same side have been able to think of me positively and pass my name along, which of course has everything to do with that fun notion of reputation.
You have a focus that I like on relationships and building relationships, not only with attorneys, but other expert witnesses, because you learn from each other. What are some of the best ways that expert witnesses, and in particular newer expert witnesses can get together with other expert witnesses and understand the way that they think, the way they organize, the way they strategize, the way they think about expert witnessing in general? Is that primarily through the workplace, through meeting people in engagements? Do you get together somehow? How do you go about forming these sorts of bonds and relationships?
Well, one is be present. It doesn't matter whether you're sitting in the back bench of a courtroom and you're sitting next to another expert, or you're in the hallway, or you take one of those classes. Our director of legal research at Blue Ocean Global Technology, who's also the chief legal officer at Girl Power Talk, my colleague and friend Ashna Dougal, we had her participate in several different courses related to expert witness work, because she's also become an expert on our team. And she fostered friendships and introduced several of those people to me, and that's resulted in new clients and business. I think that you have to proactively pursue reaching out to people, and you have to come at it with, hey, look, you're looking to learn, you're looking to see where there's common ground, but have the agenda of, I want to understand where somebody has come from, who they are today, and how can I be an asset in their life. And so, for instance, I can think about one case I did in North Carolina, and there was a data forensics expert on the opposition side, and we started talking, and our team ended up interviewing him, Derek Ellington, and we featured him on Blue Ocean Global Technology's blog. And he comes back to me and says, Samir, people find that interview, and that's been a big positive. And so I think you have to find ways, and you go into it saying, hey, look, how do I give without remembering and receive without forgetting? And I think when you do that and you stay persistent and tactful in how you collaborate with others, I always say, if you give me the opportunity, you'll see over a little bit of time that Samir's somebody you want to keep around. And I probably bring up the proverbial average on all the people you have in your life.
Let's get into some of the nuts and bolts of expert witnessing. Tell me a little
Sure.
bit about your preparation techniques. You're going to go into a deposition. You're getting ready. What are the sorts of things that you like to do to make sure that you're well prepared for either a deposition or even a cross-examination or a trial?
Well, first off, let's clear the elephant in the room. Doing a deposition, which is kind of like being pinned up against the wall with the attorney, because it's not a two-way street. Although maybe I'll tell you some stories about ways I've made it a two-way street.
I'd love to hear some stories about that.
Fun and entertaining. But anytime you're going in, it is going to be a stressful, nerve-wracking situation. When people, like, for instance, I'm testifying in a trial next week in New Orleans, and I was talking to a client earlier today, and she said, Samir, that must be so exciting. Are you excited when you go in and testify in trial? And I say, really excited when it's over. It's like running a race. Like, you can't wait to get in. And of course, looking back favorably, and I've been fortunate to benefit significantly as an entrepreneur, because people say, well, I'm thinking about hiring this guy, Samir Somal, and his team at Blue Ocean for digital branding, or some custom dashboards, or even software development. And well, he testifies on these issues. That is something important. So, that level of reputation, I can think, I had one recent new client that watched a video testimonial from an attorney in California. And that client and their counsel said, Samir, we know you're really good. I don't know how you got a senior statesman in the legal industry who is in his mid-60s to leave you a video testimonial about how good you are, because attorneys are typically loath to do that. But he must really like you, and you clearly did a really good job, and that was enough. And so how did I get to that point? Well, for that particular case in Orange County, I over-prepared, and I always try to do that. And, one, you got to know your report. Everything falls back to your report when you're oftentimes under cross-examination. And so if there's opposition reports, you got to know those too. Or if they're off limits, you got to make sure that that's clear as well. Making sure that you can always ask when being cross-examined to have someone point back to that, anticipating potential points of weakness in your own case. Where are the avenues that they're going to come back? Like, it doesn't matter how much the damages are that I quantify. I know it's the opposition side to come back and to say, look, well, why did you choose this? Why did you choose this particular variable on the impressions model and the click-through rate? and I know that's going to come. So how do I make sure a defensible conservative estimate is in play? And so you have a clear understanding of how your testimony fits into the case. Of course, what are the legal principles involved without, giving any legal conclusions? In fact, that's one of my favorite disclosures. You can, just like, you're going into any exam, you got to prepare answers for it. And there's a big difference between, anticipating what people are going to provide and simply just reading over your report.
Right.
I do mock cross examinations with counsel or with our own team. We now have 14 international attorneys on staff. And so I'll have them, of course, prepare me and review, previous testimonies and things that you've said. And again, go back to counsel and make sure that you ask them, even for the case I'm doing next week, I'm preparing with counsel tomorrow, also on Saturday, and we're potentially even meeting on Sunday when I get to New Orleans.
Does some of this happen, or all of it happen virtually?
Well, following COVID, I think a good portion of all of our work is virtual. Many times, I think counsel and clients want you to appear in person. I've done depositions and testimony because I have oftentimes a committed calendar. For instance, I was speaking at a family office investor conference in Bogota, Colombia, but I also did a deposition on Monday of last week from Bogota. And so remote, I think, is part of it. But that those interpersonal connections are important, and you try to make sure you meet somewhere in the middle. I know that sometimes there's moving targets, trials change, and oftentimes I have an international travel calendar that's in place. So you try to move things, and it's a healthy balance of both as an expert, but make sure you're not a diva about saying, hey, you know what, this is how I want things.
Are there any specific considerations when you appear online versus in person, or is it largely the same?
Yeah, well, look, if you're appearing online, it's like 2D versus 3D. So your energy is going to be more important. Of course, you're going to dress professionally regardless, but you have an opportunity to, make up for the fact that you aren't able to be there in person. So, for example, I can think of one particular case where my testimony, as it is oftentimes, is cited as being critical for the outcome, which of course is the ultimate compliment. And
Mhm.
it was a jury trial. And I started by apologizing to the jury and saying that, I really regret that I'm not able to appear in person. It was travel that had been earmarked for quite some time. And I hope that you'll just accept my apology. I know that your time is valuable, and your service to our judicial system is something that is near and dear to my heart. And thank you for giving up your time. Not that you may have much of a choice, but I want you to know that I respect that, having served on a jury. And that's how I began. And you could see the jury just warm up to the person that I am, because I showed my appreciation.
So connecting with the jury in that way is important. That's something that I've heard from other expert witnesses as well. What other ways do you use, whether or not you're online or in person, to kind of connect with the jury?
Well, the jury is they're also people, so you have to remember that. And I think that when you acknowledge and have empathy for their situation, and also many times jury, are made up of, not as sophisticated of folks that are involved in the trial. If it's in, a company trial and you have CEOs and you have all these attorneys. And so I try to communicate effectively, be educational. One of the ways that I've differentiated myself and why I think I'm sought after for casework in a range of subjects. Like some other experts ask me, like, how, Samir, do you have so many different subjects that you become an expert on? I think that's because I take an educational approach. I prepare so that if I'm speaking to a jury, uh, I am able to take some of these complex concepts involving internet defamation, Google Analytics. They may or may not spend any time on social media. And so how do you make that information relatable and digestible? And, when you say it, I hope everyone on the jury is following me. If not, I'm happy to rephrase what I just said, because I think it's a really important point on this case as to why I'm here. And they lean in, you're able to look at the countenance. So you speak to them and, be a little bit, vulnerable about it. I've had cases where, I say, look, this case has become personal to me because it's such an egregious example of the violations of, our First Amendment and freedom of speech. We have laws where you can't say anything about anyone for this very reason. And so I took on this case because for me, it is about justice. And it's been very clear to me through my independent investigation that these particular points are the tipping point as to why I believe that my report is accurate and valid.
Do you use visual aids to help convey some of that information to the jury?
I defer to counsel on that. I think a lot of times you'll get asked visual aids, by your own counsel. Others, I think they can be helpful. Many times our reports are like so expansive, and you got different appendices that there are visuals. I think when we're creating reports, we're putting in visual aids without a doubt. But yes, they can be helpful, but collaborate with the attorneys to make sure that because many times counsel will have a presentation and they'll have different elements they want to follow. So that, depending upon the case, may or may not make sense. But of course, as you well know, pictures are 1,000 words, and they can certainly be impactful.
Sure, absolutely. You mentioned justice. Is that what's important to you about being an expert witness? What in general, what are the things that drive you to be an expert witness? What, in a broader sense, is important about the profession?
One, I think it's serving as a voice for those who don't have one. I'm in a fortunate position where I do turn down many cases, especially if I don't feel like it's something that I want on my own profile, or I'm going to be able to represent because I don't necessarily believe or I see, I say some obvious warning signs, which we can cover as well. I love being an expert witness because of the learning curve, and you're able to meet and interact with attorneys and clients that you wouldn't otherwise. I think being a resourceful person, I'm proud of the fact that probably 75% of the attorneys and clients that hire our team and me to become an expert, they end up working with us in other capacities with their law firms, with the companies, or with the individuals, or to actually address some of the things that we've spoken about, because that's where our business, that's how we became an expert. So it creates opportunities. I think also you are challenged. I remember that, Richard Branson line of, receive an opportunity. Sometimes you say yes and you figure it out later. And, I think I can say that now, that as an expert, there have been times I've taken on cases where I didn't necessarily know how I was going to go about it, but I said, you know what, I think I've got part of this, and counsel has confidence. And I've spent an extraordinary amount of time that I don't bill for, of course, getting up to speed and working so that I can best represent. And then those areas become, focal points of expertise. It's like people ask me, Samir, I'm a stark contrast to many experts because they may have an academic background, of course, not generalizing, but there are a lot of academics. I don't have an academic background, although I would say I'm a closet nerd and somebody who tries to go to bed a little bit smarter than when I grew up. But I'll give you an example in a landmark case that I was doing for one of the largest law firms in the world, DLA Piper. There was an opposing expert in this sensitive case, and so I was staying up all night preparing and helping the cross-examination for the other side, and they relied upon me, and I built very good relationships with some of the partners there in Melissa and Tamar. And in this particular case, the opposing expert that I had done a rebuttal report was an academic, which is great. And some of my best friends are academics, to be very clear. And I'm a member of the Academy of Legal Business Studies, but I don't necessarily have the academic time. My justification for being an expert is the practical experience. But
Sure.
this particular gentleman had, of course, been almost personal in his expert report critique of me, and so much so that counsel and the team at DLA, was not happy about it. They're like, Samir, it's almost crossing the line here, the way he is, and so, I reviewed and looked at it, and I ended up giving advice, and it turns out that this gentleman he was a consultant, and he did some work in internet, and then he became an academic. But I empowered counsel with some of the questions, and I remember he was on the stand, and I think the lead counsel, Tamar, who heads intellectual property in the U.S. for DLH, she said to him, "So when did you leave, practice and become an academic?" And I forget the exact dates, but I done the calculations when I looked at that, and it was 2 years, I think, before Google was founded.
Oh, wow.
And the case was about intellectual property infringement and e-commerce, et cetera. So she kind of walked him down and said, okay, so you're providing testimony in this, but you left the field 2 years before Google was founded, but you're testifying on this. So anyway, sorry for the long-winded answer, but that was an example.
No, that's great. Absolutely. I want to go back to one of the things that you mentioned that stuck with me was that there's some kind of red flags, some warning signs you might have said when you are deciding whether or not to accept an engagement. What are some of those things that you look for? What are the things that set you off that you think to yourself, maybe this isn't the right engagement for me?
A couple of them are like your inner heart and gut about the person that's hiring you, especially the client. And I can think of one particular case that I ended up dropping where I said, look, I genuinely empathize and feel for you, which is why I want to take this case on. And I'm going to be as reasonable as I can from a billing and fee perspective. And two things happened. One, this particular individual, she wanted full control over my report and would disagree with everything. And the conversations were exhausting because, everything that we'd say, and I'd be like, well, who's the expert here? And then from a compensation standpoint, she kept saying that I'm really glad that you want to do this report and you're going to do it as reasonable as possible. And I sent a bill to her, and she's like, I'm having a meltdown about this. We need to put a cap on it. And what I always say to clients and counsel is that, look, I'm a damages expert, and I cover a lot of different ground on damages, agnostic of what case it is. And if this case, I'm going to recommend 6, 7, 8 figures of damages in order to defend against that, and in order for you to get an outcome, we're going to have to put in a lot of work.
Sure.
It's not about, oh, great, I have this expert witness case, I'm going to be billing a lot. It's how is it going to stand up in court? And that also relates to how you ensure that you give the best possible chance for settlement. So she kept playing into the fact that will you understand my case? And I'm glad you, and then when it came time to pay a bill, and I ended up leaving that case and not even receiving $1 from it. And that's okay. That was a lesson learned, because I'd rather leave the case on good terms and say, hey, look, technically we have this pending balance and that is owed, and I'm leaving this case. I'd rather chalk it up to, me being a little bit smarter in that case. So that's one where it just didn't feel right. And it's one thing to have anxiety or stress about a case because you want to do your best and it's challenging and you're committed to it. It's another thing to dread working with a client and on a case. And if you have the latter, that may be a warning sign. That may be a reason maybe you shouldn't do that one.
When you talk about how it was a lesson learned, how do you go about setting those expectations before they become some sort of a problem? Do you now take a retainer, for instance, or do you make sure that the billing is pretty nailed down before you get started, or how do you grapple with that? Well,
in this case, it was very clear and transparent. No, it just so happened that she started squirming because she was getting counsel paid for from insurance. So,
Mhm.
our money had to come out of pocket, and that's okay. I typically do request a retainer, but again, you pretty much know in most situations you're dealing with a business, you're dealing with an individual relative prominence, you're dealing with a law firm. Sometimes in the engagement letters I send, I normally have that, the payments come through the law firm so that I make sure there's some accountability there. But for me, typically, there are no issues with respect to payment and billing. I think you got to communicate and make sure you let, people know. And there have been situations where we haven't communicated and there's been a relatively large bill at the end, and it's only because there was a short deadline and you barely had
Mhm.
any time to think about it, and you get busy. So I think you just try to be reasonable. I've had a number of cases where people have come back and they'd said, "Hey, can you work with me a little bit on this?" And I say, "You know what? Yeah, I can." And I've had the vast majority of cases where people, they don't even flinch or think twice when they pass along, when we pass along invoices. And I think that's a testament to people knowing you provided value and them being confident about it. So, in summary, there, I think you just need to make sure that you measure twice, cut once, and when you're working with people that you feel good about and they like you, usually payment and billing isn't an issue. But no, regardless of the type of business you're in, an industry, be it law, be it expert witness, be it a doctor, be it a manufacturing company, you're always going to have clients and situations and people that don't necessarily want to pay, and that's why they have something called accounts receivable.
Do you have any stories about cases that affected the way that you approach expert witnessing fundamentally, or kind of change the way that you think about things, or somehow inform the way that you go about some aspect of expert witnessing? What are the kind of seminal moments in your career?
I have to bring in one of my favorite subjects and passions, which happens to be the study and understanding of the life of Abraham Lincoln. And of course, Mr. Lincoln was a lawyer. I have an entire bookcase dedicated to Mr. Lincoln. He's a personal hero of mine. I am a member of the Abraham Lincoln Association, and I've found ways to inculcate and integrate lines, lessons, aphorisms, yarns, anecdotes of Mr. Lincoln into my life. In fact, I'm engaged to give private dinner engagements that clients or people hire me, and I just tell Lincoln yarns for several hours. Or the power goes out on a particular presentation, and I've got to find a way to keep the audience engaged, and I've done that. And so I think that before I comment on how I've expanded upon, I can go back to one particular case, and where it was a very contentious deposition. I think it was a 10, 12-hour deposition, at least it felt that way. And it was against a rather prominent attorney who was reputable in internet defamation. And we had and it was very contentious, during the deposition. And he had researched everything about me. I mean, much respect. I knew it was going to be a challenge, but I was like, wow. I mean, he had gone into all the different case files of my existing cases, knew when I was going to get called, knew when trial was, asked me about, my work. And so he methodically went through it. And I remember, because I had prepared extensively with counsel. I remember at one point him saying to me, I want to put on record, because remember, deposition is kind of like you're up against the wall and he's shooting
Right.
at you, and you don't really have a defense. And he said, I want to put on record that the witness is not answering my question. And I responded with, I want to put on my record that counsel maybe didn't expect me to be as astute as I am and prepared, and maybe should have prepared a little bit more, and doesn't like my answers. And I can't do anything about that, but I am giving my answers appropriately. And so there's a lot of that back and forth, and it was quite adversarial, which is okay. And at the end of that deposition, I said to him, and I said, Joe, I said, I just wish you were more like President Lincoln or Lincoln the attorney? Kind of did a double take and said, well, kind of looked at me. And I said, you know, Joe, when Mr. Lincoln knew his client was guilty, he actually couldn't give 100%, which is a violation actually of current ABA code. But you know your client is guilty, but you're a hired gun and you're giving 1,000%. I wish you wouldn't, but hey, that's right. And the line was so, I mean, I think counsel on our side had to go off video, and he encouraged me. And I have an article actually that's been submitted to the American Bar Association about Lincoln, ethics, that whole situation. But the long-winded point there is that I've found ways to be relatable because of my relentless study of Mr. Lincoln, and have been on the stand, giving analogies, that relate to Mr. Lincoln. And I think that has become a competitive advantage. And I've been engaged by opposition counsel who came back to me and said, Samir, you did this case 2 years ago, and I remember you, and you were so good. And I remember going back and saying, man, I wish our expert was as good as you are. And now here I am. I got this case, and you're the first person I thought of. And, I thought it might be inappropriate or a little bit strange to call you, but I really do like Lincoln. I got Lincoln in my office. Like, let's talk about it. So, anyway, that's where Mr. Lincoln has been a part of my persona and identity, and probably not the worst person to be associated with. So I'll work hard for it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Before we wrap up, do you have any last advice, words of wisdom for expert witnesses, and in particular, newer expert witnesses?
One is those who say they can and those who say they can are both usually right. Give it your best. Know that, every person, every company, every country started from nothing. People oftentimes, I was asked by another new case, Samir, the first thing they said, we're going with you. But Samir, before we get started today and talk about it, can you just walk me through how you became, because they've looked at my case history and they're like, you're an expert witness in financial related cases. I saw one regarding wealth management. You've done intellectual property. You've done technology source code. You've done, you testified against Meta in an arbitration. You're across the board. Like, how did you expand the discipline of expert work, and how have you been admitted every time? What are some of the ways that you've gone about it? And I think that and of course I don't need to go into my response, but the point is that if Samir, who doesn't necessarily have a technology background, is considered one of the most prominent and reputable internet defamation expert witnesses, I think that it's plausible for you. Be flexible. Don't go in with a rigid mindset. You know what? This attorney and counsel may want to do it completely different from the other. So be malleable, be flexible, proactively follow up. I was on another case involving a prominent gentleman in politics. I have a case right now, and I followed up with the attorney because we'd sent them the draft report, every week for 4 weeks. And the counsel in Virginia, he said, Samir, I know the only reason I haven't responded is that the client hasn't been there, but your follow up is awesome. And communicate, pick up the phone. I pick up the phone, I call an attorney, I leave him a message, I let him hear my voice, I let him know that I'm thinking about them. Don't hide behind email. Don't pretend that, okay, I sent the email, now my work is done. And I've been engaged again and again because attorneys say, Samir, there's nobody that follow-ups as thoughtfully and patiently, and it's kept me on track on the case, and that becomes my reputation and why people want to work with me.
Mr. Somal, sage advice. Thank you so much for joining me here today at the roundtable.
Thank you. It was a pleasure, and appreciate the opportunity, Noah, to share perspective. And if one or two people from the roundtable community or the aggregate population can leave here with a little bit more context and knowledge to make more informed decisions and become better experts, then I think me and you consider today a big win.
Absolutely. And thank you to our listeners for joining us for another discussion at the roundtable. Cheers.
Thank you for listening to our podcast, Discussions at Roundtable. Our show notes are available on our website, roundtablegroup.com. Subscribe today on Apple Podcasts or your favorite listening apps.